The powerful story of Abraham and Sarah, a story of faith and God's promise. What would you do if God made you a promise that seemed completely impossible? Would you believe it, or would doubt begin to grow in your heart? Long ago, there lived a man named Abraham and his wife Sarah. They lived in a time when people traveled with their families, their animals, and everything they owned. Abraham was known as a man who trusted God, and Sarah was his faithful companion. They had lived together for many years, sharing both joys and challenges. But there was one deep sorrow in their lives. They had no child. In their culture, children were considered a great blessing. A family without children often carried sadness and disappointment. As the years passed, Abraham and Sarah grew older, and the hope of having a child seemed to fade away. One day, something remarkable happened. God spoke to Abraham. God told him to leave his homeland and travel to a new land that God would show him. This was not a small request. Leaving one's homeland meant leaving behind familiar places, relatives, and security. Yet Abraham chose to obey. He trusted God's voice and began a long journey into the unknown. But God did not only ask Abraham to travel. God also made an incredible promise. God told Abraham that he would become the father of a great nation. His descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the shore. Imagine hearing such a promise when you have no child and you are already growing old. From a human perspective, the promise seemed impossible. Yet Abraham believed. Years passed as Abraham and Sarah continued their journey of faith. They moved from place to place, living in tents and trusting God to guide them. During this time, God repeated his promise to Abraham again and again. Still, there was no child. As time went on, both Abraham and Sarah began to feel the weight of waiting. Sarah had waited many years for the joy of becoming a mother. Now she was far beyond the age when women normally have children. One day, God visited Abraham again with a surprising message. God told him that Sarah herself would give birth to a son. When Sarah heard this news, she laughed quietly to herself. It seemed impossible. How could a woman of her age become a mother? But God asked a powerful question. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Time continued to move forward, and then something extraordinary happened. When Abraham was about 100 years old and Sarah was about 90, God fulfilled his promise. Sarah became pregnant, and in the right time she gave birth to a son. The couple who had waited for so many years finally held their child in their arms. They named the child Isaac, a name that means laughter. Sarah said that God had brought laughter and joy into her life, and everyone who heard the story would share in that joy. The birth of Isaac was more than just the arrival of a child. It was a powerful reminder that God keeps his promises. Even when situations seem impossible, even when time passes and hope seems small, God is still able to do what humans cannot do. The story of Abraham and Sarah teaches us a powerful lesson about faith and patience. Faith does not always mean that we understand how things will happen. Sometimes faith simply means trusting God, even when the answer has not yet arrived. Abraham believed God's promise, even when he could not see how it would come true. Sarah experienced the joy of seeing God turn her years of waiting into laughter and celebration. Through their story, we are reminded that God's timing is not always the same as our timing. What feels like a long delay to us may simply be part of a greater plan. The promise given to Abraham and Sarah would eventually grow into a great nation, just as God had said. Their story became a foundation of faith for generations to come. And even today, their story continues to inspire people around the world. It reminds us that when God speaks a promise, he has the power to fulfill it, no matter how impossible it may appear. So whenever you feel discouraged, remember the story of Abraham and Sarah. The God who kept his promise to them is still faithful today.